Boniface actually pushed them out. And what was the faith? What was the religion of the Anglo-Saxons?
They were pagan.
They were pagan. So we have this Christian area that was taken over by paganism. And then what happened? You're going good. What happened next?
Oh, the Romans came, right?
No, this is after the Romans left. That's why the Angles and the Saxons came in, was to kind of fill the void that the Romans left. But then, did the Britons, the native Brits, what were they called? Celts. Did they like the Angles and the Saxons? No. Why? Oh, I don't know. Killed, raped, murdered, stole, destroyed. All these fun things, right? No, they didn't like them. They didn't like them, they fought them, and worse, also, they would not give them the faith. So, who had to finally give them the faith? Who re-evangelized Southern England? Speak up, please. Please. More louder.
Augustine.
The who?
Augustine.
Augustine, yeah, not the St. Augustine, a different one. Who sent St. Augustine? Pope. So now it's previously the Celts were evangelized not by Rome. There's actually some kind of controversy in the English Church between the original evangelization and what its influence was, and the later evangelization by Rome. This produced some conflict. We won't go into that here. But anyway, so that's right. So Rome comes in, and so for 150 years now, up to about middle 600s, the land has been evangelized by the church again, and born into that time was Winfrid. Thank you. He grew up in the church, went to a monastery, learned there, had a great career set before him. He had everything set before him. He had a good life. And what did he choose? What did he choose? What did he choose? Did he stay in England? What did he choose to do? He didn't stay in England. Where did he go? Where did he want to go?
Friesland.
He wanted to go to Friesland, and he wanted to evangelize his ancestral people, the Angles, the Saxons, and even the Jews. So, this land right here, the Angles, the Saxons, even the Jews, and also called Friesland. There's all kinds of names that get mixed into here. Sometimes you will say Anglo-Saxons. Sometimes we'll say Friesland. I don't know all the specifics, so those names we'll kind of use them interchangeably. We'll use one and the other, and they'll all kind of mean the same thing. So he comes back and wants to bring the faith to Friesland. The Romans, prior to this time, the Roman Empire, when it had expanded out, hadn't been able to beat them. They were too far away, too strong. The Romans they drew a line and just said, here, you don't cross that line. But someone that had been able to, after the Romans left, the Romans, of course, had to draw back, and their empire began to shrink. And so the more it shrank, the less they were going to have any influence on the Angles and the Saxons. So the Roman Empire fell, and it turns out that we have a tribe, a group of people in this area of Europe called the Franks. It's a German tribe that kind of settled in what we now call as France. And they began expanding their influence, and they actually did rule this land, the Angles and the Saxons. The Romans had never been able to subdue them, the Angles and the Saxons, and although they had nominally been drawn within the great kingdom of the Franks, those are I don't think I have it on here, but can't move this again. Okay. The Angles and the Franks that were down here in France, they had kind of somewhat of a influence over this land. It was impossible not to be proud of these Saxons' intense love of liberty, their physical strength and endurance and courage. But, looked at from another side, the condition of these Saxon people was pitiable indeed. They were mere barbarians wrapped in the darkness of paganism. Their religion, which had descended to them more or less variation from the ancient Germans and Scandinavians, was, like that of most rude barbarians, largely built upon the worship of external nature, mixed up with the adoration of special qualities and the endeavor to appeal to certain evil influences. They worshipped things. They worshipped trees and the spirits that were all around. They had, for example, Woden, or Odin, the supreme ruler, the All-Father, the God of victory, who dwelt in Valhalla, presiding over his countless armies of heroes, all drinking mead. Mead's nasty stuff. You ever had that? Feasting on bear's flesh, and over the countless continuing in this heavenly palace the heroic battles in which the souls took delight during life on earth. There was Zeo, the god of war. Who do you suppose was the god of thunder? Who was the god of thunder among these Jews and Angles and Saxons?
Thor.
Who?
Thor.
Thor. Yeah. You ever heard of him? They made a movie about him, didn't they? Yeah. Thor, the god of thunder and weather. Freyr, the sun who rode on the golden bear. Freya, the moon and the goddess of love. Herta, the goddess of earth, Mother Earth, and Tusko, the earth-born god. These Angles and Saxons believed in demons, dwarves, in black and white elves, and in goblins, and all of them regarded as supernatural beings of a kind, and all of them believed to be capable of helping or hurting them. What are you going to do when you live in an area where there's a lot of gods and they're not all for you? What do you do? What do you do? What do you do when you live in an area where the gods aren't all for you?
You have fear.
I didn't. Who said that? You have to do what?
You have fear.
You have fear. And so what do you do because of that fear? You're correct. What does that fear engender? Fear is very close to another activity, another human activity. What is it? It's very, very closely associated with it. What's closely associated with fear? It's kind of like the other side of the same coin. Fear.
You're either violent or you hide.
Okay, I'm looking, you're right, but there's something else that I'm looking for. Fear involves worship. What you fear, you worship. That's just not something I say you ought to do or ought not to do. That's just what happens. If you fear something, that is a part of your worship. And so these guys feared the spirits and the demons in the world, and so they worshiped them. What's the problem with that? When you end up worshiping and fearing that which is not God, you end up, if you don't worship that which is beautiful, you're going to worship that which is what? If you don't worship what is beautiful, you're going to worship that which is what? There you go. And the demons that sit behind all of this worship are ugly. They're fallen. And they demand ugly worship. Who your God is affects everything you do. Who your God is, the first question you need to ask yourself is who. Nobody is an atheist. God doesn't believe in it. You've heard of atheists don't believe in God? Everybody heard that? God doesn't believe in atheists. You have a God. You have somebody, something that you fear, something that you worship. You may not know it, but you do. And what you worship, if it is not God, ends up being very ugly. It may look beautiful. It may disguise itself. It may appear great. You may have a culture built all around it. But here's what their culture did. Worship was performed in consecrated groves, in the recesses of dense forests, and under large sacred trees. And in these places, fit enough to create as well as to harbor superstition, they sent up their prayers and offered up their sacrifices of animals and human beings. Is this not, at least we don't worship, at least we don't sacrifice human beings to our God anymore, do we? We don't do that anymore, do we? Except what happens to 1.2 million children every year, at least in America? Everybody sacrifices, and human beings are the first things that go. Their religion was cruel in its rites and intense in its superstitions. It enslaved men's minds under a yoke of abject dread of evil consequences falling upon them in this world, while it nerved them to do prodigies of valor on the battlefield, in the hope, in other words, in the hope of being received and rewarded as heroes in the Valhalla and the world to come, by no less a person than Woden himself. So let's kill, maim, destroy, sacrifice here, so we get glory there. That is the world into which Winfrey stepped into. The French had kind of subjected them. The Franks were ruled by another set of kings called Merovingian for about 300 years. And they had driven out the Romans, the Franks, these guys down here, in France basically. They had kind of pushed out the last of the Romans that were left there. And they had their own king, pagan, but who eventually embraced the Christian faith. The French kings embraced the Christian faith. The kingdom reached the top of its power under a guy named Clovis I, covering most of what we know as France. When he died, his sons divided up the kingdom. What happens when you have a king and 4 sons? What's the next thing that happens? Oh, they get along fine. They're all happy with each other, right? And they just live happily ever after. Is that what you studied in history? What happens when a king has 4 sons?
4 kingdoms.
You have 20 wars because this guy's attacking this and these guys began up on that, and that's what happened. They would unite against foreign enemies, but they would also frequently fight amongst themselves. Eventually they were reunited, but at a high cost. So they eventually did, somebody went out and kind of forced them all back together. But when they were reunited, when this area right here was brought back together, it was done so at a high cost. And here was the cost. The guy got to bring it back together, the king did, but he had to give his nobles, the guys right under him, the dukes and all, he had to give up a lot of his power to them. He said, if you'll If you'll help me get the kingdom, then you can do this and you can have that. And if you'll help me, then you can have this and you can have that. Well, the guy that made king promised so much to all these people that in the end, when this guy became king, he had no power. And so these kings, there were kings, they kept ruling. And eventually, they got weaker and weaker until they were called and I don't know the French, R-O-I-S, Royce, I don't know, F-A-I-N. Let's see if I can get it. Here's the word, right. If someone can pronounce this French word, it's, there it is, right there. That guy right there. So Royce, it means do nothing. They were kings. They could talk to other countries. They could do everything as long as they didn't tell anybody what to do. As long as they sat on their throne with their scepter and their crown and just sat there and did nothing, they were fine. But, so where was the power in France? Where do you suppose? Who had all the... somebody has to tell somebody what to do. Where did it reside? There was an office in in part of France called Mayor of the Palace. I may have been in...
Mayor.
Manor of...
Mayor is...
Mayor means mayor. Oh, wow. Yeah. So Bishop Gerhard was the ruler of... Mayor of the Palace. He was the guy who told everybody what to do. The king was in charge, but the mayor of the palace told everybody what to do. He ran the armies. He told everything. And so, about the time of the late 600s, we have Pepin of Herstal. Pepin of Herstal. H-E-R-I-S-T-A-L. Pepin of Herstal. He wielded the real power among the Franks, and he was located in east central France. So if you can imagine France and kind of in the middle, but over to the right a little bit, that's where he ruled from. Pepin of Herstal. Now you're going to have to kind of maybe keep some of these names straight, because there's going to be two Pepins that we're going to be talking about. This is the first one. Pepin of Herstal. Here's a painting of him, and here's something else. I think he's the guy right here. That's Pepin of Herstal, and there's somebody coming to ask him or greet him or something. Just some cool pictures, I thought. So the Frisians, these guys up at the top, had been kind of beaten by the Franks, but not too much. Frisians kept not doing what the Franks wanted them to do. So had been somewhat subject to the Franks, but had fought for their independence. Pepin, this guy right here, that guy right there, Pepin came through, reconquered them, and forced Frankish rule back over them. And then Pepin, the ruler of the Franks, himself sent out missionaries to the lands he conquered. This was a guy, this is another saint, Willibrord. He also was from England, but he was about Winfrid, the guy we've been studying, St. Boniface. He was his father's age. He went before St. Boniface, before Winfrid, and he was in this land of the Frisians. He was the guy, it was this guy right here, who was sending all the reports back to England that Winfrid heard and says, I've got to go there. It was this guy right here. And so Pepin of Herstal had helped and protected this guy, and he was able to evangelize in Friesland. As Pepin reconquered the provinces in that part of the shattered empire, he commended the city governors of them not only to promote the work of the missionaries by every means in their power, but he held them personally responsible for the missionary lives. The king sent out missionaries. What do you think so this guy would conquer a land, and then he'd send in missionaries. What do you think about that? What do you think about a king that conquers a place and then sends in people to tell them about his faith, whatever it is, in this case a Christian faith? What's your impression of that? What do you think about that? Somebody tell me, how does that strike you?
Not a lot of separation of church and state.
Speak up.
Not a lot of separation of church and state.
Not a lot of separation of church and state, that's true. That didn't exist. That simply wasn't an idea in anybody's mind. The state and the church were simply married together. Whether it was the state and the pagans, the state and Islam, the state and the Christian church, they just didn't exist separately at this time. So they come in. Now, I say they didn't. Let me ask you this. How did the Christian faith start? Somebody tell me, how did the Christian faith start? Where did it start? Where? In a city. Where did, in the area? What part of the world?
Jerusalem.
There you go. Jerusalem, Middle East, right? It spread out into the Roman Empire, and the Romans were real happy to have them in. The emperor said, oh, we'll become Christian and do all that you want us to do, right? Is that what the Romans said?
No.
What did the Romans do to the church? Persecuted it? Yeah, they persecuted it. There was the Christian church, is, as far as I know, one of the very few, if not the only religion that really starts out apart from, separated from the governing authorities. When Islam started, that's not how Islam started. It started with the sword. Now, yes, the church did pick up the sword. We had the Crusades. I don't deny that. That's not how the church started. And I would maintain that's not exactly how Christ has called the church to expand, to go. So, the church has not always done what it needs correctly as it needs to do. But neither have any of us. God simply uses the people that are here in all of their ugly, messy glory. How many of you know somebody that somehow God seems to be working through him or her, and you think, I wouldn't use him? Anybody know what I'm talking about? Anybody think of someone like, that guy seems, that guy seems to be odd or do bad things going on, but yet God somehow seems to have a hold of that. God is going to use Winfred and Willowbroad, even in the midst of maybe not things that we would consider perfect. So in 716 now, this is about the time that Winfred is getting interested in going over there. About that time, Pepin of Herstal died. The French, remember French in that area? His kingdom fell into civil war, and guess who saw their chance? Pepin died of the French. Who saw their chance now? Who wants to take advantage of that? Who are we talking about? What area of the world are we talking about? What's that northern area called that was green? The Frisians. Their master, the king of their master died, and so what are they going to do? What do you do if your enemy loses his leader? You fire him. Say, hey, maybe I can throw him out. Their king's gone. And so that's what they did. They led a revolt against Pepin's son. And so here is the king of the Frisians now. Radbod. He's an interesting character in himself. He led the revolt. He said, we don't want them in control anymore. And so he led the revolt, fought them, but when Pepin's son, anybody know who the son of Pepin was? Who was the son of Pepin of Herschel?
Charles.
Who? Somebody speak, I just can't hear.
Charles.
Did I hear a Charles?
Martel.
One of the, oh, well, Charles. Ha! So, who was, oh, well, I can't hide him. Here he is right here. Charles Martel. How many of you have heard Carl or Charles? Both. How many of you have heard of Charles Martel? Okay. Other than my students who have heard of Charles Martel. Charles Martel is the reason that in this class we are studying this instead of the Quran. Or one of the reasons we are studying this instead of the Quran. I'll get into that later. But Charles Martel is incredibly important to Europe. So
722.
yeah. We'll get to that.
Very good.
So 716, he takes over from his dad. Beats Radbod's army, beats the Frisians again. And Radbod, okay, now remember, what are the Franks doing? When they win a war, what's the next thing they like to do? What's the next thing they like to do? What did I say they do? They send in missionaries, yeah, to convert everybody to Christianity. Well, Charles, Radbod he revolted, tried to get out of the control of the Franks. Charles comes in and says, nope. And so Radbod, although his army is defeated by Charles Martel, he's able to go home and do some things on his own. Even though Charles now is back kind of in control, he's able to do some things that Charles wasn't able to kill Radbod. So Radbod goes back home, and he can't beat Charles Martel, so guess who he is going to beat? Who are the Franks kind of people, the forward people that go in? Who did we just say? The missionaries. And so what do you think? Radbod's a pagan. So what is he going, if he can't take it out on Charles Martel, who's he going to take it out on? The Christians. That's exactly what happened. And so it was into this environment, Charles Martel had beat Radbod taking his army back to his home. He was angry. Yeah, what happens when your big brother beats you up or does something outside, you've got to go home, and all of a sudden you're in his room and he's not there. You know, have you ever taken it out on somebody else like that? Some of you have. And that's what happened. It was not a good time for the church in Frisia. And that was the time when Winfrid came to Frisia. He came there to help Willibrord, the guy who was there before him. And he failed. Wilfrid failed. He just wasn't able to do anything. After all that preparation, all that work, everything, he had to turn around and go home. And this wasn't like he went to the store, forgot his money, and had to go back home. You know, you've done that, right? This is your life's work, prepared and failed. Have you ever set out on high hopes of a great task only to have it come crashing down on you. You ever done that? You ever had, I know what I want. I've got my life prepared. I've got this really big thing prepared. You ever had that? You ever seen something like that? That's what happened to Will. That's what happened to Winfred. So what did he do? Well, he bided his time. He waited, and he made another plan. And he says, "I'm going back." And here's how he went back. Instead of going straight to Friesland this time, he went from England all the way down to Rome to talk to the Pope and get some more spiritual authority to be able to work among the Frisians. So this is a little bit later picture of Rome, but that's where he went. While he's in Rome, Pope Gregory II always walked around with little angels, and he didn't. No, he didn't. But this is actually his icon of Christ right here, and that would be Mary. And so he comes to the Pope, and the Pope's quite excited about Winfred and his ideas. So he gets the blessing of the Pope. The Pope makes him something called a papal legate, which means basically you don't have to report to a bishop and all that stuff. You're my man, so you get to do. You just can come talk to me directly when you need to. And then, as he was working with the Pope in Rome, he gathers up some interesting stuff. He gathers up some what are called relics. This is just how the church worked at the time. When the church started, what happened? What the Romans do? They kill people, right? They kill Christians, and the Christians would build churches where these martyrs had died to honor the martyrs. I mean, it's a good thing. And somebody died there. They say, "Look, we're going to build a church. Where you wanted to wipe out the church, we're going to build a church." Well, what do you do when you have more churches than martyrs? I mean, I guess you could make a few more, but not many people volunteered for that. So what they would do is they'd get bones and pieces of these martyrs, or things that people claimed were bones and pieces of martyrs, and they would take them and they would use them when they were establishing a church. So he goes back, leaves Rome, and goes back over the Alps, and he stops to. He doesn't quite. Let's see if I got a picture. He doesn't quite make it to the Frisians yet. He goes right kind of into central Germany. The reason is Radbod's still alive. The guy that pushed him out initially a couple of years ago, that guy's still there. And as long as he is there, he can't go back. There's a real interesting story about Radbod. While he was there, guys were talking about it. He even actually, as evil as he was, had actually thought, well, maybe okay, I need to get baptized. And on being persuaded to be baptized, Radbod, and that's this guy right here, having dipped one foot into the tank, drew back the other and demanded whether there were more of his predecessors, people that came before this pagan king Radbod, whether more of his predecessors in paradise or in hell. On hearing that there were more in hell, he drew back the other foot and said, "It is better then to follow the many than the few." So, maybe. I'm not sure I want to follow many to hell, but that was his decision. So that's where he was, in the middle of Germany, waiting for Radbod to die, and worked there. So eventually Radbod did die. He went back to Frisia, worked there 3 years, and had great success in the northern part of Germany, up here in Frisia. Had great success, baptized and converted a lot of people. So much so that he felt like he wanted to go in other places of Germany, and what we now call Germany, and work there. And so he went to Hesse. I'm sorry if I'm pronouncing it poorly. Hesse? I'm close enough.
Hessen.
Hessen? Well, they call it Hesse in this book, H-E-S-S-E. And also to Saxony. And he evangelized there. Converted many there, too. Goes back to Rome after having, some great success. Talks to the Pope again, new Pope this time. So gets associated with the Pope. Takes a vow to the Pope. And then the Pope, once he takes that vow, the Pope makes him a bishop and gives Winfrid a new name. And that name is Boniface. That's where he gets known as Boniface. And so from now on, he is Boniface. So, sends him back to Charles Martel, gives some letters endorsing him to Charles Martel. Charles says, sounds good to me. And Charles Martel sends him out into his territories and has him evangelized. Charles Martel and his successors, his next two descendants down, in some sense, basically made Europe. That's how big these people were. Am I out of time?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Well, I'll have to continue later. So, one of the things, let me say this. One of the things that Boniface did over and over and over again as he was converting the people is he went out and did, it's said that he did something in particular. What was it that he did to these people? He preached and he did what? He preached and he did what? I didn't hear. Speak up. Yes. Baptized. Why did he baptize? That sounds like a good question for a small group.
Yeah.
So, that's what you're going to be doing.